"Excuse me, sir, you can't board the plane yet." Those were the words that stopped Sergeant John Morris in his tracks. He had one mission: escort the remains of his fallen brother in arms, Private First Class Michael Hayes, back home to his grieving family in Wyoming. John had served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, seen the worst of war, and earned more medals than he cared to count. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, bringing his brother home. Wearing his full dress uniform, the rows of ribbons across his chest reflected more than accomplishments. They told stories of sacrifice. His boots were polished, his posture was perfect, and his heart was heavy. But now, at this airport gate, he was being denied access to the very flight carrying Michael's casket. "I'm the escort for a fallen soldier," John said firmly, keeping his emotions in check. "That casket is on this flight. I need to be with him." The gate agent hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. "I'm sorry," she said. "There's been a flight change. Your ticket didn't transfer. I'll have to speak to a supervisor." John understood procedures, but this wasn't just any ticket. This was a sacred mission. And the airline had just made a very big mistake. John and Michael had served in the same unit. Michael, just 22, had looked up to John like an older brother. They trained together, deployed together, and laughed through long desert nights together. But one roadside bomb changed everything. Michael didn't survive the blast, and John, who had made it out alive, asked for the honor of escorting Michael home. It was a time-honored military tradition. No fallen soldier travels alone, not ever. As the official escort, John was responsible for staying with Michael's remains through every leg of the journey, from the military airbase overseas to the final handoff to the family. Even layovers were spent standing guard, never far from the casket. It was about dignity, respect, brotherhood. John had made one final promise to Michael's mother. "He'll never be alone. I'll bring him home myself." And now, an airline mix-up was threatening to break that promise. Passengers around the gate began to notice the tense conversation. A few overheard John's words. Then more began to gather, curious about what was going on. "Wait," someone whispered. "He's escorting a soldier's body? You're seriously telling him he can't get on?" A woman with 2 children stepped forward. "Why are you stopping him? This man is doing something sacred." John, still calm and composed, repeated his explanation. "The casket of Private First Class Michael Hayes is on that plane. He's not cargo, he's a soldier, and I'm not leaving him." A man in a business suit pulled out his phone and began recording. Others joined in. Social media began buzzing, but John didn't want drama. He wanted respect. "I made a promise to a grieving mother," he said, his voice steady but raw. "I will not let him fly alone." The pressure at the gate was rising. Still, no boarding pass. Still no override. Until one man stepped forward, and everything changed. A quiet voice cut through the crowd. "I served. Let me speak to them." Retired Air Force Colonel Richard Lane was seated nearby and had witnessed the entire scene. He walked directly to the airline supervisor, his own bearing unmistakable. "This man is not asking for a favor," he said. "He's carrying out a duty that few civilians understand. When a soldier dies in service, they are not shipped home, they are honored home, and someone like Sergeant Morris makes sure of that." The supervisor blinked, caught off guard. "This isn't about policies or ticket codes," Colonel Lane continued. "This is about honor." By now, dozens of passengers were watching. A few had tears in their eyes. The crowd began murmuring, "Let him through. Do the right thing. He's a hero." Finally, the supervisor nodded. "We'll take care of it." Not only did they give John a seat on the flight, they upgraded him to first class. As he boarded, every passenger stood up. Some saluted. Others placed hands over their hearts. Even the flight attendants wiped their eyes. Once seated, the captain made an announcement that would stay with everyone on board. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to carry a fallen American soldier on this flight. Escorting him is Sergeant John Morris, a combat veteran and hero in his own right. We ask for your respect during this journey." Not a word was spoken, just silence. Reverence. Hours later, as the plane touched down in Wyoming, John stood tall once again. On the tarmac, a military honor guard awaited. The casket was carefully removed, draped in the American flag. Michael's family stood in tears. John walked beside the casket step by step until it reached the hearse. He saluted, eyes filled but unblinking. Later he would say, "It wasn't about me. It was about keeping my promise. No soldier gets left behind. Not in war, not in death." The airline later issued a public apology and updated its policies for handling military escorts. A mistake turned into a movement for greater respect, greater awareness, and greater care, because some passengers aren't just travelers, some carry the weight of heroes. John Morris wasn't just a soldier. He was Michael Hayes' mentor, his battle buddy, and like a brother. They had trained together at Fort Benning, where Michael was the fresh-faced recruit, eager to learn, and John was the seasoned sergeant who took him under his wing. Through dust storms in the desert and firefights in dangerous zones, they forged a bond stronger than steel. They shared stories, protected each other, and dreamed of what life would be like after the war. John saw potential in Michael, a rare kind of heart and loyalty that stood out even in the toughest conditions. But war is cruel. Just weeks before Michael was due to return home, an improvised explosive device, IED, struck his convoy. Michael was killed instantly. The news hit John like a sledgehammer. He had seen friends fall before, but this one was different. This was personal. John didn't hesitate. He went directly to his commanding officer and requested to be Michael's official escort home, a duty of deep honor and responsibility. The military approved it. For them, this wasn't just protocol, it was sacred. When a soldier dies in combat, the process of returning their body is treated with the highest respect. From the battlefield to their final resting place, they are never left alone. That's where the escort comes in. The role is not ceremonial. It's a 24/7 mission of presence and protection. The escort must accompany the remains through every stop, every transfer, and every layover. They sleep near the casket, eat in view of it, and never turn their back on the fallen. John understood that better than anyone. For him, it wasn't just duty. It was a promise to Michael and to his grieving family. At the military base, John ensured every step of the preparation was done right. The casket was draped with the American flag. His uniform was pressed, and perfect. His orders were in hand. When the flight manifest listed him as the escort, it felt like everything was in place. He had one job: bring Michael home. Unbeknownst to the airline staff, among the crowd of stunned passengers stood a man who had once worn the uniform himself. His name was Colonel Richard Lane, a retired U.S. Air Force officer who had spent over 30 years serving his country. He had buried comrades, saluted flag-draped coffins, and stood silent at more military funerals than he cared to remember. He had also been an escort once. Watching the scene unfold, he could no longer remain still. He calmly stepped forward, silver hair neatly combed, his posture still straight despite the years. "Excuse me," he said to the gate agent and supervisor. "I'm Colonel Lane, retired, U.S. Air Force." The staff looked at him, uncertain. "I have one question for you," he continued. "Do you know what it means to be a military escort?" The gate agent opened her mouth but said nothing. The supervisor lowered her gaze. The crowd leaned in, silent now, sensing the weight of what was coming. Colonel Lane turned to the onlookers. His voice, though not loud, carried across the terminal with commanding authority. When a soldier falls, someone must bring him home. Not a delivery truck, not a courier. A brother in arms. Someone who ensures that soldier is never alone. That's what this man, Sergeant Morris, is doing. And that duty is sacred. The entire gate fell silent. Then came a slow clap. From the back. Then another. And another. Within seconds, applause filled the terminal. Not the usual polite airline clap. This was different. This was respect. Raw, real, and loud. A man in uniform was trying to fulfill the final mission for his fallen brother, and now, the entire airport stood behind him. Someone shouted, "Let the soldier through." Another added, "This is America. We don't turn our backs on our heroes." The supervisor looked overwhelmed, emotional even. With tears threatening to fall, she finally nodded and said, "We'll make room. We'll fix it." But it wasn't just about fixing a booking error anymore. It was about making it right. John was immediately cleared to board, but the crowd wasn't done. A man in first class stood and walked over. "Give him my seat," he said. The airline declined his offer because they had already made the change. John would ride in first class, seated with honor. Not for luxury, but for what it represented, gratitude and respect. As John walked toward the jet bridge, the crowd began to rise to their feet. Some saluted, others placed hands over hearts. Mothers held their children a little closer, whispering in their ears, "That man is a hero." Phones were no longer recording in protest. Now they recorded something different, a moment of shared pride. And as John stepped onto the plane, passengers inside began to stand. Row by row, they rose in silence. A flight attendant placed a hand gently on his shoulder and whispered, "We're honored to have you with us, Sergeant." John nodded, eyes misty but composed. He didn't need applause. He didn't seek attention. He just wanted to keep a promise. But in the chaos of modern air travel, one mistake can cause a chain reaction. Somewhere between the military coordination office and the commercial airline, a flight delay triggered a rebooking. John's connecting flight was changed, but no one manually updated his escort status. On paper, he looked like any other rerouted passenger. At the departure gate of a crowded civilian airport, John approached the desk, documents in hand. He identified himself, explained his role, and asked to confirm his seat. That's when he heard the words that made his stomach drop. "Sir, you're not on this flight." He calmly re-explained. "I'm the escort for a fallen soldier. I need to be on this flight. It's carrying the remains of Private First Class Michael Hayes." The gate agent frowned. "I understand, but you weren't automatically rebooked. The flight is full. I'll have to speak to my supervisor." John tried to stay calm, but time was running out. The casket was already loaded into the cargo hold of the plane. If he missed this flight, Michael would fly alone. A violation of everything this mission stood for. To the airline, this was just another ticketing issue. A rebooking mishap. A uniformed passenger with a complicated request. But what they failed to grasp was the gravity of the situation. This wasn't about convenience. It wasn't about comfort or upgrades or miles. This was about honor. John had served nearly 12 years in the Army. He'd seen systems fail and people make mistakes. But this was the first time he had felt truly helpless. Not for himself, but for the young man who had trusted him with his life. He could feel eyes on him now. Other passengers waiting to board were beginning to notice. A few overheard the conversation. Some leaned closer. Whispers began to spread. Is something wrong with the soldier? Why won't they let him on? John, still composed, said, quietly, but firmly, Michael was more than a soldier. He was like a little brother to me. And I made a promise, to his mother, to his unit, and to him, that he would not travel alone. He looked the gate agent in the eyes. Please, don't make me break that promise. As Sergeant John Morris continued to explain his role, his tone was respectful but firm. He didn't demand special treatment. He didn't shout or argue. He simply stood there in full uniform, clutching his orders and holding on to the promise he'd made. But even calm words carry power, especially when they carry purpose. Nearby passengers began to take notice. A few overheard phrases like fallen soldier and escort. Some turned their heads. Others stepped a little closer to listen. Then, from the middle of the line, a woman's voice rang out. Wait, did I just hear that right? You're stopping a soldier who's escorting a fallen comrade? Another passenger, an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran cap, spoke up with disbelief. This can't be happening. You don't leave a man behind, not in the air, not on the ground. Whispers turned into conversation. Then came outrage. "Let him through," one young man called out from the back. "He's doing something we should all respect," another added. More people gathered near the gate. A mother with a toddler on her hip asked the gate agent in confusion, "Is he really not allowed on? But he's in uniform. He's with the body, right?" The agent, clearly overwhelmed, repeated the same lines about flight rebookings and full capacity. But those explanations were no longer holding up. The energy shifted. What had started as quiet curiosity was now a growing movement. The tension in the air thickened. A businessman in a tailored suit stepped forward and calmly took out his phone. "I'm recording this," he said, "because people need to see how you're treating a man honoring the dead." Others followed. His lead, lifting phones, starting live streams, posting to social media. Still through it all, John Morris didn't raise his voice. He stood tall, proud, but quietly disappointed. "I made a promise to his mother," he said softly, eyes on the floor, "that he would never be alone again." As the gate agent scrambled, the situation began spiraling beyond their control. Their job, usually about boarding zones and carry-on sizes, had turned into something much bigger than airport logistics. The airline supervisor finally arrived, her expression tense but professional. She scanned the growing crowd, stepped behind the counter and asked, "What's the issue here?" The original gate agent repeated the situation. "He's not on the flight manifest since the rebooking. It's full. We've tried to contact customer care. Nothing yet." John stepped forward, holding his official documents and escort papers once again. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I am the assigned military escort for Private First, Class Michael Hayes. His body is in the cargo hold of that plane. I must be with him. That's my mission." She nodded slightly, but her voice was still procedural. "We're doing everything we can, but I can't just bump another passenger unless we get approval." "Approval?" someone repeated angrily in the crowd. "He's escorting a soldier who died in combat, and you need to ask someone if that's okay?" Passengers were no longer just concerned, they were furious. Several offered to give up their seats. "Put me on the next flight," one man offered. "I'll wait another day," said a woman, but the supervisor hesitated. Protocol, airline systems, red tape. That's when a voice from the back of the crowd cut through everything. "Let me make a call," said the elderly man in the Vietnam vet cap. His name was Colonel Richard Lane, retired U.S. Air Force. He had been watching quietly but couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped forward, identified himself, and pulled out his phone. Within moments, he was speaking directly to a military liaison at the Department of Defense. "This is unacceptable," he said plainly. "You have a uniformed escort being blocked from accompanying a soldier's remains because of a computer error." Within minutes, calls were being made. Emails were sent. A message came from high up. The decision was swift and final. Get Sergeant Morris on that plane. Immediately. No more confusion. No more delay. The airline, suddenly aware of the magnitude of their mistake and the publicity it was generating, rushed to correct it. They didn't just give John a seat. They moved him to first class. A flight attendant personally escorted him down the jet bridge. As he walked toward the aircraft, the crowd at the gate began to applaud. Some saluted. Others clapped. Many simply bowed their heads in quiet respect. The gate, once a place of confrontation, had become a place of honor. As Sergeant John Morris quietly settled into his seat at the front of the plane, head bowed and hands folded, the cabin doors closed behind him. But what happened next would leave a lasting impression on every single passenger aboard. The plane hadn't even taken off when the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, steady, but filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we are honored to carry not just passengers, but a hero. In our cargo hold is the flag-draped casket of Private First Class Michael Hayes, who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to this country. And in seat 1A sits Sergeant John Morris, his escort, his brother in arms, who was bringing him home to his family in Wyoming." The cabin fell completely silent. "We ask," the captain continued, "for your respect during this flight, and we thank you for honoring this soldier's final journey. No applause followed. No movement. Just silence. The kind of reverent stillness usually reserved for sacred spaces. A flight attendant stood near John, hand pressed over her heart. Passengers stared out of windows, tears silently rolling down cheeks. Strangers of every background, every age, bound together in that moment by shared grief and shared gratitude. No one spoke. No one needed to. John, still in uniform, simply nodded once. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't want it. He wasn't the story. He was just a soldier keeping a promise. As the plane soared through the clouds, John sat quietly with a letter in his pocket, one he had written the night before to Michael's mother. A letter filled with memories, pride, and the last moments he and Michael shared overseas. A letter that said, in his own words, he was brave, he was kind, and he was never alone. Flight attendants moved quietly, offering drinks and snacks, but many passengers declined. It didn't feel like an ordinary flight. The energy had shifted. Something deeper hung in the air. Respect, reflection, maybe even a reminder of what sacrifice truly means. When the aircraft finally began its descent, the captain spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching Casper, Wyoming. Upon landing, we ask that all passengers remain seated while our military escort disembarks with the remains of Private Hayes. Thank you for your understanding." Outside the window, the Wyoming sky was vast and blue. On the tarmac, a full honor guard stood at attention. Flags rippled in the wind. The hearse, polished and solemn, waited nearby. The aircraft door opened. The air was cold and dry. John stood first, walked down the jet bridge, and met the honor guard. Together, in synchronized, precise steps, they approached the cargo hold. The casket was removed slowly and carefully, draped in the American flag. John walked beside it, never looking away. Every step was deliberate, every breath held. In the distance, Michael's family watched. His mother, father, sister, and a few childhood friends. They stood in silence, arms around each other, tears flowing freely. But they also stood with a small measure of peace, knowing their son had not traveled alone. John fulfilled his promise. From the dusty roads of Afghanistan to the tarmac of a Wyoming airport, he had been by Michael's side. Later that day, under the open sky, Michael was laid to rest with full military honors. Rifle shots echoed across the hills. A bugler played taps. And when it was time, John stepped forward to hand the folded flag to Michael's mother. "I was with him the whole way," he whispered. He wasn't alone. Not for 1 second. She reached out, touched his sleeve, and whispered back, "Thank you for bringing my boy home." John would later speak only briefly about the experience. He didn't want praise or publicity. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about him. I was just the one lucky enough to bring him home." As for the airline, the story went viral. Videos taken at the gate and on the plane were viewed millions of times. Veterans groups, civilians, and even military officials weighed in. Faced with public backlash, but also an opportunity, the airline responded with humility. They issued a formal apology to John and the Hayes family. But more than that, they took action. They revised their policies. All staff received new training on handling military escorts with proper protocol and respect. They launched a new system to automatically flag and prioritize escorts, ensuring no one would ever again be denied in such a moment. What started as a mistake became a movement, a lesson in compassion, a call for dignity, a reminder that some missions are more important than rules and procedures because some missions are bigger than travel plans. Some promises are written not on paper but on hearts, and some heroes never make it home unless someone like John Morris walks beside them. And that's a journey worth remembering.